In this episode of SENSimilla, we'll be talking to a baller finance bro who went from investing in cannabis companies to starting his own. Today's guest is from Australia and is finally going to explain Vegemite to us. Is it made of vegetables? Is it made of mites? Why is it a thing? Stay tuned to find out. Most importantly, our guest today started the first legal dispensary in New York City. Paul Yao, CEO of Union Square Travel Agency, which we're also going to talk about branding. Welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being here, man.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's exciting. Love to have you.
Thank you. Feign excitement. It comes across. The viewers love it.
I know. I'm very excited. Very excited.
Cool, man. Thank you. Well, I appreciate you being here. I know how busy you must be. So I like to jump in the time machine, and we want to go back kind of as far as we can when it starts to get interesting. But before we do that, because of the so being the first legal, and I'm using air quotes for people listening, the first legal cannabis dispensary in New York City, that's a marketing spin that you have to hang on because of kind of currently the environment in Manhattan. Okay, so I lived in New York for many, many years, and for sure was scared sitting on my stoop smoking a joint, walking down whatever street I happen to be on, smoking weed, being in Central Park. Like, these are all risks people in New York City take. Now, things are totally different. You know, not only is the smell of cannabis in the air prevalent basically anywhere, but there are the streets, the avenues are dotted with these illegally operating retail businesses. So the fact that you have to say, there's a hidden agenda in saying that you're the first legal cannabis dispensary in New York City, right? Like, it's like, on one hand, there's the optimistic part of what you're saying. We made it. We're the first to do it. Isn't this crazy? But really, what you're at, go ahead.
And I should actually, I'm going. So we weren't actually the first. We were the third to open.
Well, either way,
we're the third. But I can confirm, though, we are the number one. So
there you go. But the fact that you have to use that not only as like a validator, right? But it's also a clarifier, right? Because I'm saying, yes, we're here. We are first, second, third, whatever to make it. But also, like, all those people you're seeing on 7th Avenue, 9th Avenue, 10th Avenue, every bodega that you go into, they're not operating legally. And I think that, like, that's an important distinction that you're dealing with. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, we actively kind of market ourselves and try to differentiate as legal. Just a subset of kind of legal dispensaries in New York State. We're small just due to the rollout and everything else. But we're also finding that the customers, like, it's a different type of clientele necessarily who comes to us, who might go to a bodega, and over time that's also changing. So certainly we're not finding a shortage of people who appreciate the difference, which is good. You know, it's about education, and the OCM, the New York Office of Cannabis Management, you know, invested heavily in trying to educate as well. So, you know, it's an educational process.
So still, like, you're still having to rely on not only educating your customers, but hoping that customers kind of figure it out on their own, that maybe, you know, the deli where they get their, you know, ham, egg, and cheese on a roll and their morning blunt maybe shouldn't be the same place.
Maybe they kind of think, like, you know, these are little kind of different products, you know? Yeah. But, you know, like where we are in Union Square, you know, if someone comes in at 6 p.m. and they see, like, you know, 100 people there, they kind of get the feeling that this is legit, because it is legit.
Totally. Yeah, I think it's, you know, like I said, I was there I lived there for many years, but and have been back many, many times. But, you know, I was at a trade show a couple months ago, MJ Unpacked, and in Midtown, it's just like, you know, every block there's two operating illegally, you know, selling counterfeit products. You know, you see all these California brands that are all of a sudden in New York. They're obviously all fake. It's wild. It's a wild time, especially as, like, you know, this should be something you celebrate. You are the third here. You, like, that's the real thing, is like, you're doing it correctly, you know?
Yeah, we are. And, we have more hurdles to get to this point than like an illicit store. There's tremendous amount of licensing, regulation, enhanced security, testing, the whole supply chain. It's not just me. It's like the cultivators, the processors, we're all doing the right thing. And there is a big differentiator between doing it the right way and not doing it the right way.
I think so. I think so. And especially since the tourist market for cannabis in New York City is wild. I think that there's going to be, I don't think it'll be long before some of these things sort themselves out in terms of consumer behavior.
Yeah, and like the whole enforcement is coming. Like New York Tax and Accounting is in charge of it, and we appreciate that. We don't want war on drugs 2.0, so it's a bit more of a light touch enforcement. But they're out there enforcing. It's just
right. It's less a war on drugs now than just a war on zoning regulations, right?
Yeah, and a war on potentially a war on landlords.
There you go. Well, take me back to Australia. It's obviously a far away from New York City. So what was it? It's I've never been. Take me there. What's it like? How many spiders, wild animals, whatever tried to eat you growing up?
It's just like everything in Australia can kill you. So, I play golf, and like in Australia, it's like if you hit it into the rough, you have signs which are like, "Don't go into the rough because there's poisonous snakes." You don't
something in there wants to kill you.
In the States, everyone's just out there. Like in the rough, like you might, on the Northeast, we might get a tick. But
totally. Yeah, Florida is really the only example of that in America where like you can step outside and literally anything can kill you. It could be a snake, a gator, a crazy person on bath salts, like whatever. They're kind of similar. So, what did eventually bring you to the States and specifically New York?
Yeah, so I was born in Melbourne. And an interesting thing about Melbourne, it's a big city. So my wife is from Indiana, and being in the States, people like, sometimes if I'm in the Midwest, they're like, oh, it's probably good to be here. It's a smaller city, reminds you of home. And it's like, I grew up in a city with 5 million people,
Yeah.
It's like, but, I was in banking and private equity, and that brought me over to the US. And I did that for, around a decade here. And then I kind of branched out and, did some entrepreneurial stuff. I co-founded a startup, and, I got into growth equity, then VC, and, the kind of rest is history. It's a long journey, but, that's how it kind of got me into the entrepreneurial path.
Talk to me about private equity because, I think between that, venture capitalism, investment banking, like all these things to non-financial people are, maybe all the same or maybe just completely alien. Can you just talk a little bit about PE?
Yeah, so I was working for an Australian firm called Macquarie. We're investing their balance sheet. So, in the lead up to the 2000s, it was kind of like it's an era which we'll never see again where, things were just a lot more bullish.
A lot of W's.
Yeah. And so it was, it was a great time to be in that industry. We would invest in companies, and we would try to like grow them, and then we would exit them. And it was just kind of a great time. But then, the financial crisis hit. A number of the portfolios got, were distressed because there's typically leverage, and we kind of had to get operationally involved and roll up our sleeves and really try to work them out and fix these. And so, that was probably my first experience of being operational.
Like around 2008, that you're saying, like when
2000,
shit started hitting the fan.
Yeah, 2008 to 2012. Like there was a bunch of portfolios which I was involved in, like in, all industries, aerospace, oil field services, financial institutions.
Everything took a hit. And so you had to actually like go to work. You weren't just like the money guy, like you had to clock in some of these places.
Yeah, well,
right.
It's like, oh, you buy it, you got to take responsibility. So,
sure,
you got to fix it.
Talk to me about that, because I think that's wild. Like you have these investments. You probably had a decent portfolio, multiple companies that you had, fingers on. And then I just think of the stress of like trying to run my own company, right? And like making sure that even if we're just talking about cash flow, right? Like the stress of that day to day, and we're not talking a portfolio size company, right? Like we're okay. Talk to me about that stress. Like that must have been a huge change in your day to day from, being money guy to like having to go in and maybe figure out how to dissolve some of these companies, lay people, break some hard eggs.
Yeah, no, it's tough. Like, because what dawns on you very quickly, it's just like there's real humans involved. Like,
Totally.
there's people who, are probably earning minimum wage or a bit over minimum wage, and it's just like, your decisions actually impact people. And it's really that balance between, you have to do things for the good financial health of the company, but you try to be humane as well, right? You
Yep.
not trying to yank the carpet out from under people with no notice. And it's really, it's tough. Like there's no easy way to do it, but you just try to be human, treat people how you want to be treated. Like it's kind of like very simple things, but you know, just don't be a complete assassin.
Totally. But sometimes it's like, what is it? What's Moneyball, right? Have you seen Moneyball? Do you know this movie?
Yeah.
All right. So there's like, I'm going to butcher the quote, but it's like, Brad Pitt's teaching Leonardo DiCaprio how to, sorry, Brad Pitt's teaching Jonah Hill how to fire somebody. And he said, what would you rather take, 1 to the head or 5 to the chest? So like, I think that's the quote, but something like, but you get the picture. Like you gotta like rip the Band-Aid off in some instances. Like it's must be just a hard balance.
It is. But it's just like I remember the first time I lost my job. Someone called me who I knew, and they're just like, "Is this the first time?" I said, "Yeah," and they're like, unfortunately for probably a lot of us, like in corporate world or just in jobs, it's like it's not everyone will go through it at some point. Like
Yeah,
hopefully they don't, but they will. And it's just like you just have to realize that you get to the other side of it. You'll get a job. Sometimes it's good. Like sometimes you just
yeah.
changes
It's
go.
usually way harder for the founders than it is for the employees that the founders have. Like,
Yeah, being a
there's
founder, it's like having a child because like
yeah.
that's tough. That's tough. Like when it's a bit more institutional, it's you're a little distant from it.
So I mean, talking about this, especially like around, just PE around 2000, that the financial crisis, then were you flexing entrepreneurial muscles? Like had you considered it, or was like, you know, being involved in all these portfolio companies something that you were like, oh, maybe I can do some of these things?
Like I think the exuberance of youth and just maybe the naivety of it. You think you can do anything, and it's just like,
Yeah.
yeah, I can't.
Dude, I love this, by the way. And we like it's entrepreneurial arrogance. Like that seems like a cynical way to frame it, but it really is. It's like in some instances, it's like it's that confidence, but also like I've painted myself into a corner or my back's against the wall. So I have no choice but to be confident and maybe a little arrogant.
Yeah, and it's just I think I don't think entrepreneurs are made overnight. Like they probably are for some
Oh,
people, but it's also like it's like the brain damage and it's an act of doing, right? It's an act of doing and seeing and understanding repetition and like, it's trying to like for me, it was like having being involved in these startups and seeing them, it's trying to shrink something which is like a mile wide and like really reduce the focus to like these are the things in front of me which I need to do just to kind of move forward. Like
yeah,
everyone's seen the dream, but it's just like it's so hard to just make progress towards it.
totally. I'm curious too, just coming like, my entrepreneurialism came from, or my desire for entrepreneurship, let's say, I think was the result of arrogance, but also timing, right? And maybe having my back against the wall for sure, like not having a choice, right? I had come from like a creative background. I applied creativity in whatever sense at every instance of any of my careers throughout my life. I'm curious, like, as you're working in PE and you're like maybe trying to understand a company's story strictly through balance sheets. Like you're literally looking at dollars, and then having to kind of get to a point where you start your own brand. Can you talk about like the mind shift of like, can you talk about that mind shift a little bit?
Yeah, and I think it's an iterative process, I find, where, just over the years, when I think about when I was like doing private equity to where I am now, there's been a long journey where, I've worked with a number of other entrepreneurs. I've kind of, you've just been awoken,
Yeah.
like really absorbed a lot of stuff, whether it's like, you have to understand, like I was always good on the finance side because I was a finance guy, but it's just like understanding the marketing and the HR and the tech and, just understanding how things intersect and politics. And, it's just like, when you are a founder, you wear a lot of hats. Like by no means are you an expert in everything, but you kind of have to be somewhat competent in most of them.
Make it till you make it, right?
Smart enough to actually know what you don't know, right?
Yeah. Well, and surrounding yourself like that's where arrogance is the wrong word, because you have to have the confidence to like, jump in both feet, but you have to have the self-awareness to know that like you can't swim. You know what I mean? and that there's probably, like surrounding yourself with people who are, smarter than you, or what, in whatever way, like being open to absorbing the information. Like, here's my skill set. It's like it's the duties of a CFO or whatever. I understand the finances of this. Like, I'm going to bring in this team to help me like tell a story. I'm going to bring this team to like help me put a team together, like actually put a team together, like all these things. How do you, if you're funded, this might be a little easier, but how do you decide when you take off certain hats?
Like I think as you scale and you just realize you need that level of professionalism, expertise, like is just when you naturally step up. So when, like with this latest venture with the travel agency, we at a point, and it's probably when we got the real estate, like we kind of knew, or I kind of knew that this was potentially going to be quite big, right? And it's just like at that point, I was like I got to stop effing around. And it's like, look, first hire, let's get a real retail leader someone knows this. And so like we hired Mike Conway, who's our head of retail, who's an absolute superstar. But like we were smart enough to know, like, we're not here to try to like, learn on the job, right? I don't want to learn the job. I just want to bring the best in class I can get and leverage that expertise.
That's where being funded helps, right? Like you can, you can recognize and solve for that problem, quicker, more efficiently, whatever.
Yeah, totally. And funding is always like, the 1,000-pound gorilla, like, entrepreneurs, founders are constantly dealing with. And, it's different on a case-by-case basis. And it's all about, so every story is different. Certainly with the travel agency this time around, it was an easier story than some other things I've been involved in. But it's always a slog.
Cannabis is sexy for sure. New York City is sexy, for sure. Retail in New York City, very sexy. Cannabis retail in New York City, like the sexiest, right? So I love hearing, I talk to bootstrap entrepreneurs, I talk to well-funded entrepreneurs, and I think like one strives to get to, usually one has to get funding. Can you talk about that a little bit? Can you talk about how you decided to tell your story? What was important in terms of doling out equity versus keeping ownership for yourselves? Like, how did you deal with all these things? Can you just take us through the fundraising side of things?
Yeah. So I've got like kind of three partners, like go way back. Like, I've got three partners in this venture. And, like, I think it comes down to alignment, right? So certainly as it relates to equity with employees, it's alignment. Like, you want them to do well as you do well. You balance that with people kind of need some like base income as well. But we put in some seed money and then we raise the rest. But it's really about telling the story. And for us, it's like a story of, on one hand, the good thing about cannabis is people understand the demand profile, right? It's not like I'm inventing a new widget and I'm going to convince someone that this is actually going to be, the greatest thing. It's like people understand there's latent demand for cannabis and that, once you legalize, there's kind of insatiable demand for it. So the demand story is good. And so then it's just a question of like, have you got the operational chops? What's your real estate? What's your location? And we were very deliberate in getting our location in Union Square. So, we're on 13th and Broadway.
Great location.
Great location.
Right by the Whole Foods, right by the OG Shake Shack, right?
Yeah, it's a block from the MTA subway station, which has got 30 to 35 million passengers a year. And so all of a sudden, it's like, at that point, there's a lot of data, right? There's a lot of metrics you can point to. And it's like, all right, demand profile is good. All right, what's the operational team like? Well, we hired in some best-in-class people with tons of expertise. They seem credible, tick. The story of like your proximity to mass transit and things like that made sense. So, it's a bit of a mosaic, but you kind of have the big building blocks and it makes sense to people.
Yeah, totally. It's awesome. And I again, like, because I think this is so new in Manhattan, that component alone, growing a retail brand in Manhattan, is interesting. I would say to investors, like, add to it cannabis, add to it location, add to it all these things. Like, it's a great story to tell. Do you have investors who are more interested in kind of, I'm not sure how to articulate this question, but like, are you working with investors who are brand like focused, are seeing maybe a bigger picture thing than just like balance sheets and like kind of your 3-year, 5-year forecast?
Yes. In the context of people want to understand growth, right? They want to understand growth.
Of course.
Whether it's in that one store or outside of that one store, can you do multiple stores? And can you leverage brand? Can you leverage your first mover advantage to actually build something greater? So like in that regard, like, people are interested in brand and it's a growth story, and how did that all work together towards exit?
Totally. Of course. That's always the epilogue. Yeah. That's the ending always. Okay, let's get back in our time machine a little bit, because we skipped over the whole cannabis side of things. Like, one day you were, a private equity venture capital guy, and now you own a cannabis company. So where did cannabis kind of come into? Where did that happen?
Yeah, so I think in around 2017, I was working for like a venture firm, and it was connected with the family office, and that family office was making cannabis investments through a private investment network called ArcView. And ArcView was like the connector between, let's call it high net worth individuals and early stage cannabis companies. And so through that platform, we started, we made some investments. But then we got more involved in ArcView itself.
How do you mean?
Through that, the firm, together with another firm, took a controlling interest in ArcView at the time. This was just pre-pandemic, because we had a thesis about,
So first ArcView was helping manage your portfolio, your cannabis portfolio investments, and then eventually you took a piece of ArcView.
Yeah. And when we were there, we, helped to build out like an asset management business and a broker dealer, trying to put the segments of that in place so we could try to monetize this flow of money which is going through ArcView.
Interesting.
But combination of things with particular pandemic kind of end up crushing those efforts, because a lot of their program was all event based in person and things like that. But that was my first taste of cannabis, and then from there, I got involved in a operation in Massachusetts, indirectly through ArcView, because that same team, which we'd set up in the asset management side, made an investment into this business in Massachusetts. So they asked me if I'd like consult to them, and I took them on as a client, and I was doing some fractional consulting to them, which got me kind of a bit more involved into the operational parts of cannabis. And I did that for 12, 15 months or something like that, and New York legalized. And like everyone, being a New Yorker, there was a question of like,
where do I fit
in New York? And everyone wanted to be involved in New York. And, I kind of thought, maybe stupidly comes back to this bravado and arrogance, but I thought maybe I'm actually better placed to chase this by myself or form a team than with, other people.
I love that. I mean, I think that like it seems to have worked out for you. It's still very, very early in the history of Union Square Travel Agency, but seems to be looks like it was a good choice, dude. You made the right choice.
Well, it's kind of like, it's one of those times where I look back and it's like literally could have gone 50-50. And I was like, it's telling my friends, you can do this thing. And I was like, I'm either going to look like a hero or a complete idiot.
Right. I mean, never was there a time, I mean, many times, but like in terms of this, like where the timing was perfect and equally shitty. It was like equally as good as it was bad. New York was legalizing, real estate in New York is what it is. COVID, all these things like this is always like lately, of course, this has been a huge theme of this show, which is like, there's way different obstacles over the last couple of years than any normal business would have had to have dealt with.
Yeah, and like,
you gotta be confident. You have to be confident.
Oh, you do. And I also
the universe was like, no.
Yeah, and like, Union Square Travel Agency to a degree was born out of the pandemic. So
okay.
I was living like in Tribeca at the time. I had probably a 2-year-old and just a 6-month-old at that time. And like the pandemic hit, and I was just like, my wife and I, like 2 kids in a 1,000 square foot apartment.
Yeah, a New York City apartment. It's like slightly bigger than the 4 of you.
Yeah. And we lived on top of a playground. But at that point, I was like, you can't go to the playground. It's like trying to explain that.
It's torture. How do you explain that to a 2-year-old?
So we ended up like renting a place out east, and we bounced around, and eventually we ended up on the North Fork where we live now. And it's funny because I probably rented like every house like along here. Along the way, like I met my neighbor who became my partner, Alex Friedman. Alex runs a real estate fund, and at the time we kind of thought the components of having to be successful in cannabis was like, cannabis expertise, real estate expertise, and having some, political know-how. And so, Alex introduced me to our other partner, Raina, who he'd known for like, over a decade. And, so then there was the 3 of us. And then Alex's other partner, Adam, came. And, like, why I think we're successful and why we've got to where we are, it's a great team. There's no ego, and we actually really complement each other. And, you end up taking less economics because there's more of you, but you go through way less brain damage, and it's much more enjoyable. Like, when you talk about stress and you're there doing it by yourself, it's like they're long nights, right? Long nights, long days, and it's like
totally.
And some people are built that way, like they could just do it.
Yeah. Well, I think there's there's a part of being human, which is like we like to celebrate with people. And like, when you have employees, I don't know, my employees are all awesome. I love them all. They're all amazing. But I have a different relationship with my co-founders, or, my business partners, where I can like celebrate certain things with them that, my employees would just maybe, and I'm totally projecting, like they may placate in me, right? Like, good work, boss man. Like, but your founders are like, dude, like they get it. Like they're right there alongside you. Right.
Yeah.
And it's so important because it can feel pretty lonely when you're doing these things.
It can feel lonely, it's definitely lonely. It's like, it's sometimes it's like, it's just like, I like, you just like talking to people. You just like, sometimes like, what the answer is. It's just like, you like that kind of rhythm of just like bouncing it off someone. And it's like, I can only call my friend so many times where it's like,
totally.
Look, I'm not in your venture. I love you, but
I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, I totally mean it. Like, you can only look in the mirror, your rear view mirror, and be like, nice job, Paul. So many times to yourself.
Or now the 6-year-old and 4-year-old are looking at you just like, Dad, please, just what's going on?
Let's put some Peppa Pig on.
Yeah.
Cool. So that takes us into cannabis. So I guess kind of just finding your co-founders is, sounds like the universe really helped you. That COVID pushed you, a little bit outside of your apartment and your neighborhood and into new spaces where you were able to meet people. And I think like, you were physically forced out of your comfort zone. One thing we always talk about here is like, nothing happens if you don't do anything, right? And even doing things outside your own comfort zone often lead to multiple doors, opening for you. Just going to a trade show, meeting somebody new, leaving your apartment and, meeting your neighbors, like whatever, like they can oftentimes provide wild sort of circumstances for you.
Just never know, right? It's like,
you never know.
Within like my family, like my wife is the one who's out there. Like she's gregarious and she's a personality, and people know that. But like, it's not typically me,
right?
But this time it's just like the stars aligned.
Yeah, I understand that completely. It's like, okay, it's my turn now. Like I got this for a minute. So you've got the money guy, you've got the real estate guy. Like, who's the retail guy or gal, whatever? Like, this is one thing, it comes up often. I feel like whenever people start considering cannabis as like a entrepreneurial venture, of course, the first thing, I don't know why, always retail first. That's where I I thought CannaPlanners was going to be a retail store, it'd be called something different, but that's where I first started. And then eventually it melded into something else. And I had retail experience. I worked at the Fifth Avenue Apple store. I worked in Soho at the Apple store. Like I opened the Grand Central Apple store. I did all these things. I knew the insane level of commitment and understanding of retail as an experience that it would take to create something successful. And I just didn't have it. Like I didn't have that kind of energy. How did you know that it was going to be retail?
I think because when we thought about just what we could do, like honestly, like retail, when you think about the whole supply chain, retail is probably maybe one of the easiest things to get into. Like, I don't know how to cultivate. I don't know how to process. Like, I kind of know about it, but it's not my sweet spot. But I understand marketing. I understand
profit margins.
I like that part. I got. And certainly I coming back to like, what you know and what you don't. It's like, look, I felt kind of like arrogantly confident that I know how to run a retail store at a C level, B level. Like I can run a $10-15 million store. Yeah, like
sure.
But that's not what I want to do. Aspirationally, it's like, look, I want to try to get to like something 5 times that. And it's at the point I was like, that's not me, but I know enough to get someone who knows how to do that.
Interesting. So New York is maybe the toughest market in the planet to like run a business. It's, the real estate is one of the most expensive markets on the planet. It's super competitive. You got tons of competition. We talked about some of these illegal, the mass amount of unlicensed businesses selling cannabis. You got to be cutthroat. Talk to me about being a New York City company. Talk to me why is that, like, how is that going to be, aside from location, like you are located in New York City, like that's not the end of it.
No, the beauty of New York is like, when I came from Australia, New York was just like so amazing, right? And it still
Yeah,
is.
totally.
I've been living here 17 years now, and it's like, you kind of just get numb to how amazing it is and how big a market it is and like just how big it is. But so like it's just kind of like on one hand, it's like just you're going to work and you're just operating like you would anywhere. But then you check yourself, but it's like, but it's Manhattan, it's New York City. There's like,
Yeah,
and any day there's like, I don't know what the number is, but it's like 8 million people in the city. It's just,
yeah,
I grew up in a country with 20 million people, with the size of the US. And then you can think in this tiny little island, you get millions of people. And it's
right.
just like stuff happens here, stuff originates here, and it's just cool.
9 million people on 11 square miles.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And that's just wild, right? It's just like there's not
yeah.
many places like that.
No, you're absolutely right. There is no, I mean, just as a side note, living in New York City was some of the best years of my life. If finances were no option, I'd still live there for sure. There's nothing like rolling into your bodega for your morning coffee, strolling through Central Park, whatever happening on the subway.
Yeah.
Like it's an adventure. And do you walk fast? Are you a fast walker? How do you
I'm a
walk through this?
I'm a fast walker, and I'm one of those people where it's like, if I'm in
Do
the zone, like I don't
you
know even
curse
know
slow?
I don't know what's going on next to me.
Yeah, yeah. When I moved to Vermont, it took me like no joke. So like two things. There are a couple things. Like I miss getting an egg and cheese, which is stupid, but the absence of
But they don't have dairy. Like,
it's not the same, dude. Yeah, of course we're dairy. Of course, is Vermont. We have the best cow. Some of the best cows on the planet.
but it's
Some of the
different.
best cheeses ever. But it's not the same. Like we don't have crappy Kaiser. Like we just don't have it.
Yeah.
So that was one thing. The absence of sirens and street noise and taxi cabs, like that kept me up for like it took a couple weeks. And then my pace, I moved from the speediest place on earth to the sleepiest place on earth, and I was like sprinting everywhere I went for like the first 2 months I lived here. It was like I had to like
Take it down a notch.
I had to relearn how to be a human. uh can you talk a bit about the social equity component of Union Square Travel Agency?
Absolutely. So, like,
Yeah, let's
this
get
is
into it.
probably the most important part of Union Square Travel
Sure.
Agency. We in way before card and everything came out, we'd started meeting with not-for-profits because we kind of thought that, like, hey, we wanted to give back and it'd be helpful for an application, and we kind of formed partnerships with the Doe Fund and a couple other not-for-profits. And we had known the Doe Fund through one of our advisors. We had a long-standing relationship for decades with them. So it kind of felt somewhat organic. But then when the card legislation came out, which allowed certain not-for-profits to get a license, we really had this relationship where they were going to be a tiny recipient through a donation. We changed it to be like, well, there's an opportunity for you guys to get more meaningfully involved. And, they were, very trepidatious because of, the 503 status and everything else, but they saw the opportunity. And, we kind of worked through the structures and everything else. And, let's say the rest is history, but, it's just such a tremendous opportunity for the Doe Fund and for us to partner with them. An organization for 30 years has been, working, fighting against homelessness, helping formerly incarcerated, job training, employment. Like they do really good work, mostly Black and brown men. So to be able to, work with them to redistribute money back into those people and the programs is just tremendous.
That's awesome. Can you talk a little bit about how that shapes the retail side of things? Like how has that become, you hear about, I think that there's a delicate line between virtue signaling and being charitable. how do you deal with that? How has the social equity component shaped the retail side of things? How does it shape how you guys talk about yourselves?
Look, I think like ultimately with our license with Union Square, like that's the Doe Fund's license. They're the 51% owner of that license. So it's their license, right? And that's first and foremost. So like how we fit in is we're the developer and we're the operator of Union Square. So it's very organic to talk about the Doe Fund and the story and like their involvement and the great work they've done for over 30 years. As to how it melds in with retail, I kind of feel these days it's table stakes to have some social good and cause. And, you know, honestly, without that, it's kind of like you just get lost in the wash. Like when you look about the brands, you know, and I think this is just a way to be able to really lean in meaningfully on that way. And it's
I totally agree with you. I think anybody operating in this industry in any capacity owes it to not only themselves, but also the last 95 years of, you know, Americans who have, you know, gotten screwed over by cannabis laws. If you're not at least conscious of that, if it doesn't even have the smallest, you know, if it's not even the slightest bit shaping your motives, then you're in the wrong business.
kind of out of date here. Totally.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. Let's get into brand building a little bit, especially given kind of the first thing we discussed about the proliferance again of unlicensed retailers. How are you finding your customers? What kind of marketing strategies are you implementing that are working best for you currently? I know it's probably like with cannabis, we throw a lot of things against the wall, see what sticks a little bit. A lot of things are segmented, for sure, siloed. Reporting is everywhere. What's important to you guys?
It's awareness, right? It's like it's a combination of awareness, making people aware of us. You know, if we can get a customer in store, or whether they're a new customer or they've been to a competitor, once they come in, like we find they stick, and we can talk about in-store experience after. But so our whole thing is like, how do we get those new customers in? And like we try and we do everything. You know, we do a bunch of programmatic, we do radio, we do out of home, you know, we do street teams, you know, we sponsor events. You know, I'm probably missing, you know, we do socials, we do influencers. Like later this month, we have Amy Sedaris doing an in-store celebrity appearance. She's going to be. I
saw that. That's great.
He's going to be like, you know, a flight advisor, like helping doing the journey. So like we're doing a lot of stuff, really leaning in, trying to attract those customers.
Gotta love Amy Sedaris. Besides being one of the greatest comedians of all time, she is part of the Star Wars universe. So I'm sure you're gonna have some nerds showing up, cosplaying.
Totally.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, it's all part of the vibe, right? These are the things that you're aiming to do, is create an experience. And, you know, it's interesting to hear that it's rare for me to, even as a cannabis marketer, to hear someone going in so hard kind of in the paint with everything. Like generally what we're experiencing is some channels are being, you know, completely ignored, in lieu of others. And that's, you know, that's a result of bootstrapping and, you know, being really mindful and thoughtful of what strategy is going to work.
Yeah. And like humble brag, like my wife is the CMO of Tinder.
Go for it. Do it. Brag. Don't even humble. Yeah, take it.
Yeah. So my wife is the CMO of Tinder. So she's a rock star marketer. So we're, you know, able to kind of leverage her expertise and relationships as well, which is helpful.
Yeah, the CMO of Tinder. They're up and coming. They're going to do great things.
Yeah. They're on a few phones.
Can you talk a little bit about the brands that you're carrying that excite you? You know, it's still such a new market. And there's a lot more, product diversity to happen in the near future. What's awesome right now? What are you selling the most of?
So, so in New York, it starts out where it has to be New York grown, processed. But then what we see is some kind of more national brands coming in doing brand deals with New York cultivators and processors. But like, as it relates to kind of New York farms, like I love Florist Farms, Hudson Hemp, Flower House. I think they're great brands, great products, really quality. And then as some of these brands come across, it's like, what's doing well is like heavy hitter vapes, are awesome. Rove, certainly on the gummy side, with, Kiva was just a huge hit. 1907 or not, I may have got that wrong. I had
1906.
1906, sorry.
Yep. Awesome low dose brand, like great products. Like also one of those things, in terms of product diversity, I dig 1906 because it's a tablet, I think, right. That's one of their bigger products is low dose tablets. Little something for everybody, huh, Paul?
Absolutely. It's just interesting. Like there's just so much product. So in store, we probably carry 300 SKUs, 60 brands. There's probably another 100 brands trying to get in.
Of course.
So, it's we're trying to promote, minority owned, LGBTQ brands. So, it's interesting. We're trying to have something for everyone.
Yeah, again, it's like part of that social equity component of it. It's like, how does this end up shaping not only the story we tell, but the story we're trying to tell in store, what brands we're carrying, how does that, relate back to the experience that we're giving our customers? All awesome things to be thinking about. Can we talk a little bit about opening day?
Yeah.
Well, so, how was it? I just take me through some of those emotions, because I've watched some of the video online of, and you got a big smile painted on your face, but I'm curious, and of course you should, like, that's the culmination of presumably months and months of
it's interesting. The Friday night before, we did friends and family, and that was wild because I didn't know I had that many friends. It was just like it was wrapped around the block, and it was just wild, and we had a fantastic time. Then when we did the formal opening the following Monday, we had like all the dignitaries came. We did a ribbon cutting, and and it was great. But then it was kind of like, I think we had this expectation because we were so close to first, but we weren't first, that like we would open the doors and like literally like 1,000 people would rush in, and it didn't happen. Right.
Yeah.
Like, no, we still got people, but then we realized
you weren't the Beatles.
We were the Beatles, and like, the people who went first got all the earned media, right? Like they just got all that free PR and everything. But we had to fight for it. And then it was kind of like, some people were like, oh, you told me that, well, it was just going to rain. And I was kind of like, all right, now we get to work. Right.
Yeah.
And we got to work, and then, the growth has been there, and like, pretty soon thereafter, I think, I know we became number one, now like we daily do over 1,200 people a day, it's just
wild.
Yeah. So, but it's like, you got to work for it. If, you got to be smart and strategic.
Yeah. Opening day, as I'm watching you, and I'm projecting this entirely onto you, but like, I'm feeling for you, like not only that sense of accomplishment, but that sense of like, okay, now the real stuff, like that was a lot of hard work, but that was just the prep.
Yeah. And, one of the things we're most proud about, because we opened in the pop-up, and now like maybe a month ago, we fully opened our main store, which if anyone hasn't been or seen it, it's truly beautiful. Like I encourage you to go. But the pop-up, from the time we signed the lease, we got that open in 40 days. And so that we're just truly proud of, like, to be able to get open that quickly, and really just start servicing the market. That was awesome.
Well, I think when I was there, I think it was still the pop-up, and I'm eager to come check out the whole thing.
Yes, please.
Yeah, can't wait. Awesome. Talk to me, cannabis years are like dog years. So I won't ask you like where you see yourself in 1 to 3 years, but where do you see yourself in 3 to 6 months?
3 to 6 months, 3 to 6 months, we look back at this whole injunction, touch wood, it's just a distant memory. But, we would have opened a few more stores, we would have opened a few more stores under our broader brand. It's about growing that brand. And, really just watching the kind of maturity in the early days, but the maturity of legal cannabis in New York with more players, continual growth. There's only under 20 legal stores at the moment, and truly a believer. As we have more retail stores, it's like rising boats for everyone.
Absolutely.
Not even in the through the first inning, and to be one of the first is great, but to actually see the growth is going to be tremendous.
Currently, there's and maybe this news will change by the time the podcast is published, but currently licensing is on hold, correct?
Yeah.
So you have an even kind of bigger bit of runway to work with until more stores, more competition start building up. It's amazing. Paul Yao, you've been very generous with your time. I appreciate you very much. I know how busy your day is. You've got a lot to do yet. It's 4 o'clock. Oh God, it's almost 5 o'clock. You've taken us from Crocodile Dundee to Gordon Gekko, and now you lead your own charge with the third, let's clarify, the third dispensary in New York City. We're very, very pumped for the future of Union Square Travel Agency. Can you please tell the people listening where they can learn more about you and Union Square Travel Agency?
Yeah, please. Please go to www.unionsquaretravelagency.com. And we're at 835 Broadway on the corner of Broadway and 13th in Union Square, Manhattan. Come see the new store. We have the largest product selection and the best bartenders in the state. So we'd love to have you. Thank you very much. And Bill, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here again. Your time is very much appreciated. You've been Paul Yao. I've been Will Reed. This has been SENSimilla. We will see you on the next episode where I talk to another cannabis entrepreneur about how to be an awesome human being. Until then, peace out, Cub Scouts.